The Long Road by Wolfland. How in the world was he going to get down from Mount Chimney? Matang would have been the obvious option. The cliffs would provide enough earth for it to skirt down the steep descent. But of course, when Skarmory plucked him from Route 113, he hadn't been able to recall his partner in time. Shaking the thought of how upset Matang must have been, Steven affixed Skarmory's ball to his belt and plucked another in its stead. Claydol whined a hollow note as it materialized in front of its trainer. It wasn't his favorite method of transport, but it was the only option left. "You wouldn't happen to be able to teleport us back to the glassblower's house, would you?" A questioning whistle came in response, and Steven pantomimed his best impersonation of the glassblower's shop. "You know, Route 113, with all the ash?" Claydol whined again, and several of its eyes blinked in nervous lines. "We can't go there?" Emphatic waggling of its arms relayed its distress, and Steven sighed with a shake of his head. He knew Claydol was right. He hadn't called it out during their Skarmory hunt, and without having a tangible link to the route, there was no good way to get a psychic lock on the location in question. "It's all right, Claydol. It was a long shot anyway." Claydol made a resigned sound as its eyes fell dejectedly, but on their way down, they stopped at Steven's belt. Noticing his Pokemon's gaze, Steven looked to the objects in question. "Matang's not here. It's back at—" Another whistle and a short gesture cut him off, and he tried to follow his partner's logic. "But no one else can fly—" Steven paled. Claydol had figured out why that extra Pokeball was on his hip. "Oh, no. No, I can't. Claydol, it's furious with me. I can't possibly ask Skarmory for help." But Claydol was adamant, and Steven gave it a scathing look as he gave in and brought Skarmory's Pokeball to bear. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Skarmory hadn't even fully materialized when a piercing shriek cut through the air. Claydol's levitation wobbled as several of its eyes squeezed shut in discomfort. Skarmory only took a few seconds to gain its bearings before bringing its burning yellow gaze to face Steven. Swallowing thickly, he willed himself to match the bird's glare, although he was sure he didn't have enough hatred in his body to counter the intensity of Skarmory's rage. And yet, somehow, Skarmory didn't immediately charge him. Bolstered by the fact that he wasn't instantly decapitated upon calling it out, Steven gripped its Pokeball a bit tighter and put on his best placating tone. "Hey, Skarmory. I'm sorry we got off on such bad terms." The sharp clack of a steel beak interrupted him, but he pressed on. "So, what do you say we start from the beginning again? I'd like to be your trainer, if that's okay." Silence fell between the two of them, save for Claydol's nervous humming. A flicker of light glinted off Skarmory's crest as its head cocked to the side ever so slightly, and Steven was acutely aware he had held his breath after his last sentence. But he wasn't about to exhale just yet. A thin bead of sweat trickled down his temple, and just for a brief moment, his gaze wavered, and Skarmory lunged. Claydol shrieked, and Skarmory crowed, and Steven panicked, raising the Pokeball just as Skarmory's wings flashed with a wicked glint. And just like that, the air was still again, and the steel type was nestled back in the protective casing of its ball. Steven frowned as he shakily but sternly addressed the quivering Pokeball in his palm. "Just when I thought we might be getting somewhere. And just so you know, the only Pokemon allowed to kill me is Matang." His shoulders sagged in defeat. "Although, I have a feeling once I get back to Route 113, I'm going to wish you finished me off up here." The shaking stopped at his words, and Steven was left to wonder if Skarmory had actually understood what he meant, or if it simply got tired of struggling. Another cool breeze blew over the cliffside, and for the first time, Stephen felt a pang of remorse. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. But suddenly, a familiar sound carried through the thin mountain air, a chattering call that was just as relieved yet exasperated as he expected it to be. His gaze snapped up to the edge of the cliff. "Matang?" Cladle's echoing cry sounded in recognition, and Stephen was dumbfounded as the blue steel of Matang's form crested over the top of the ridge, wooden bucket and all. Even more astoundingly, it wasn't alone. "Apprentice!" the glassblower called out as he waved in greeting. "Boy, am I glad we found you!" "You're glad?" But the glassblower ignored Stephen as he continued. "Well, when your Pokemon came back to my shop all distraught and alone, I feared the worst. But when it showed me where Skarmory had flown off to, I knew we should mount a rescue right away." Matang rolled its eyes at the glassblower's half-truth. Stephen caught its expression, and he knew what really happened. It had all been Matang's idea. It just needed the glassblower's knowledge of the locale in order to get to Mount Chimney as fast as possible. He gave his partner a warm smile, and hoped that his gratitude would be enough to lessen its ire at him for yet another poorly conceived plan. "And as luck would have it, your partner and I collected more than enough ash along the way. Now I can finally fill that order, after we get back to my shop, of course." Stephen eyed the full tub of ash affixed to Matang's head, and its sour look told him that his stifled laughter undid whatever good his earlier smile had accomplished. "Let's get going, apprentice. This vase won't make itself." Stephen offered a shrug to Cladle that said he'd explain it all later, and he recalled it to its ball before climbing on top of Matang's head. With a quiet hum of contentment, Matang brought its precious cargo down the mountainside. "Whew!" The glassblower sunk back into a chair in exhausted relief. The completed vase sat sparkling on the cooling rack, nearly ready to pack and ship along with the rest of the pieces in the order. Stephen, too, sighed as he leaned back from the bellows, his back aching through the fresh bandages. The glassblower had only shown him enough sympathy to dress his new cuts and scrapes, before sending him right to work in keeping the furnace hot. They'd worked in tandem, with Stephen following the glassblower's directions, and now that the vase was done, they lapsed into a tired silence. Just as Stephen began to tug off his protective gloves, the glassblower broke the quiet. "So, what are you going to do with that Skarmory, now that you caught one?" he asked, as he thrust a broom into Stephen's hands. Stephen scowled as he began to clean up the wayward ash. "Honestly, I'm not sure." Matang hummed thoughtfully from its place off to the side. It hadn't let Stephen out of its sight since they'd returned to the shop. Stephen understood, but it still didn't help him formulate a plan on how he would deal with Skarmory's temper. "So, who's the lucky customer?" Stephen asked instead, with a nod towards the vase, trying to change the subject. "Ah, it's going to a hotel in Sootopolis. The owner just had to have my pieces in his lobby." Sootopolis. The whole reason Stephen even found himself trekking through the ash fields of Route 113 was to get to there. Even though he now had a flying Pokemon on his team, his destination still seemed so far off. "Although you'll have to forgive me if I insist on sending this order by more conventional transport." The glassblower glared at him. "Oh no, I wasn't offering!" Stephen's hands flew up in defense. "Good, because you've caused enough trouble." But the artisan's tone quickly softened. "At least you made good on your promises and helped me out of that bind. You can consider your apprenticeship officially over." Stephen gave a weak smile as the glassblower turned to face him, hands on his hips. "You know, if you're not sure what to do next, I'd suggest heading over to Lava Ridge.
The gym leader is a good friend of mine. Plus, Mount Chimney is always good for training. Just..."
His eyes swept over the filthy bandages that still wound around Stephen's arms.
"Make sure you get a good rest for yourself, too. Those hot springs work some magic on a tired body."
A smile split the glassblower's face into a wide grin.
"I know a hard worker when I see one. If anyone's going to whip that Skarmory into shape, it's you."
Stephen's eyes went wide at the first real bit of praise he'd heard from his accidental mentor. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the peak of Mount Chimney, glowing red in the night, and he steeled his mind as he caught the older man's proud gaze. "I won't let you down." Once a trainer uncovers the bond between themselves and their Pokémon, even the most fearsome of Pokémon can become trusted partners.